Hello, Megan Thompson with Megan Thompson Coaching. And today we're here to talk about how to get your stinky kid to shower. So, if you're a parent of a highly sensitive child who is stuck in taking care of their body and following through on a regular routine that includes a bath or a shower, then you definitely want to keep listening because it is the ability to get your child to follow through on this task isn't based on talking about why it's necessary to bathe. Okay, so I want to acknowledge that. So we're going to cover what's really going on. But before we do that, if you're a parent of a sensitive child and you're stuck in the meltdown cycle, then you're probably experiencing a ton of meltdowns around the bedtime routine, right? This is likely part of the contention that you're dealing with that could even be part of the daily contention that you're dealing with in your own home, where your child is refusing to do bath time, refusing to take a shower if your kiddo is, 7, 8, 9, even 10 and up, preteen. We see this for preteens as well. And so I want to clear some things up because this is not related to a developmental stage. Highly sensitive kids who are refusing bath time typically tend to do that for years if you're not addressing it early because of the changes that need to be happening in how they manage their own emotions. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But I first wanted to take a clear look with you guys as parenting a sensitive kid, that when you're stuck, when you're frustrated dealing with your child saying, that they don't want to do bath time, maybe they might even get to the point where they're saying they hate bath time, they're outright refusing, body stiff, freaking out, or it's leading to a meltdown. They might be screaming, they might get into the tub and be okay with playing, but screaming the second that comes the time to wash their hair. And so any of these behaviors, if that's relevant for you, then you definitely want to stay tuned, because what can be, the automatic thought for you as a parent is to help your child know why their body needs to stay clean, right? This is a typical, of course, priority for you as a parent, that your child is clean, well fed, right? I mean, it goes down to basic needs, that they're not developing, skin problems, and that they are not, just living in filth, number one, if they're playing in the dirt on a daily basis, right? But number two, that you're helping them build their immune system by keeping their body clean, and you're not compromising their immune system by playing into, bathing like once a week or whatever that your child would tolerate, if that, right? Or never, as many of you may struggle with in parenting a sensitive kid who's dealing with daily meltdowns. And so if the bath time, and this is true for teeth brushing too, so I want you to categorize the same thing. It's bedtime routine. It's also hygiene, the cleanliness process. And the experience is not just related to sensory, right? So we want to talk about that. We'll cover that too, because you might be thinking that you need to be solving the problem in a couple different ways, right? So let's cover how you might be trying to solve this problem, right? You might be trying to tell your child that they are stinky. And I say this with a chuckle, but you can probably count the number of times you've spoken to your child about the need to stay clean, about the science behind staying clean, about the purpose of clean, about what the definition of clean is, about why other people won't like them if they're not clean, right? All of that is focusing on building your child's knowledge. Now, if you have a smart, highly sensitive child, or even a intellectually gifted sensitive child, or a highly logical sensitive child who focuses on rules and wanting things to happen the right way and wanting to know why, then it's easy to focus on supporting your sensitive child and understanding why they might need to do this this act, right? Why they might need to clean their body. But it's really, really crucial to understand that your child already knows that they're stinky. I mean, if you've got a smart kid who has heard you say you need to clean your body because otherwise you'll get sick, or otherwise your skin will, will start to get itchy, or both, right? They're going to hear that. They're going to take that information in, and they're probably going to process this deeply, right? Because they're sensitive. They're highly sensitive, and depth of processing is not without, if your child doesn't have skills, they won't be able to pick and choose what they process deeply. They will take that information in and hold it. They will think about it. What, do I have to bathe in a certain way in order to get clean? What if I don't get clean all the way? What if I just bathe a little bit? Will that be clean enough to not get sick or to, to have itchy skin? So all the questions, right? And they might be spinning those in their head. They might not be asking you. And it's also true that it might show up in negotiation, right? Well, I bathed 3 days ago, so I'm not going to get sick, right? And that's going to show up in their reasons not to bathe because they're already healthy, right? So when you try to use logic to help your child change their behavior, they will try to use logic to maintain their behavior. So it's really important to notice that if you've shared with your sensitive child that, the reasons for why you need to do what you need to do, then they've learned it. They've learned it, because we're not talking about a child who has a processing disorder where they're not learning things appropriately or effectively, right? In terms of comprehending your message. We're talking about a sensitive child who doesn't have skills to manage what's happening in their life and how to deal with it. That is a completely different thing than knowing the rules, than knowing what's expected of them, than knowing what happens in the routine, than remembering that it happens every day and that this is a general expectation, right? So your brain might go to trying to tell them why they should bathe. It might go to telling them that if they don't bathe, that people won't like them. It might go to outright refusing to hear them out, right? Put your foot down. And end of story. You need a bath. We're doing a bath. Suck it up, right? Which is still logical. It focuses on the rules, right? And so it keeps you stuck in the problem. This is not a thinking problem, guys. This is not a thinking problem. Your child needs to think about the fact that they need to bathe more, deeper, harder, differently in order to bathe, right? That's what this is not a thinking problem. This is also not a knowing problem. They don't need more education. If you've got a smart kid, they'll put 2 and 2 together. The problem is that they have a feeling problem, an emotional problem, an emotional regulation problem. That is the gap that your child and you need to build in order to help your child brush their teeth, bathe their body, follow through with general uncomfortable hygiene. Because when you add in the sensory piece, right, then all you see is, okay, so they know the answer, right? They know why they're supposed to bathe. They're telling me they don't want to, right? All the reasons why they don't want to. And then you see that their skin is, they're responding as if their skin's being burned when they're in the water. And this is not because the tub is too hot, right? But they're reacting with screeching and screaming and hyperventilating. And, if you own a cat, the way a cat responds when you stick them in the tub, right? Most cats will get their bodies rigid, and they, I don't own a cat, but I've seen plenty of the YouTube, like the videos of silly animals, right? And so, they straddle the tub, right? There's an experience that can be super intense for your sensitive kid, and part of that is sensory. Part of that is the body overwhelmed. But the reason why their body's overwhelmed is not just because water is too much. It's not just because they don't know how to tolerate. Their skin doesn't know how to tolerate water coming down on their head, or the different pressure of a poured cup over their head compared to a shower. When they're depending on if they're taking a bath or a shower, right? But that's not the only issue, because you know that because your child is hit or miss with this, right? If they're in a happy mood and they're excited to play and maybe they're focused on the tub, then it's not consistent why they're refusing, and it's not consistent related to what they freak out about. And this is where you're stuck in that meltdown cycle, right? Because if this is one of the challenges that you experience, then, and you're focusing on getting them to be okay in the tub, then you're not focusing on the root problem, which is an emotional problem. And this is a symptom of anxiety for sensitive kids. Now, I'm not here to diagnose your kid with an anxiety disorder either. What I'm here to teach you about is that your child who's highly sensitive is easily overstimulated, emotionally reactive when stressed. They're going to respond with worry. That's what anxiety is. Anxiety is pervasive, continuous worry. And that experience, whether it's clinically diagnosable or not, is irrelevant for sensitive kids, because the typical antidote for anxiety for a non-highly sensitive child is to work with an individual therapist. But the antidote to anxiety for a highly sensitive child, and overwhelm for a highly sensitive child, and meltdowns for a highly sensitive child is the parent-child relationship. Your relationship with your kid is the end-all be-all catalyst, influencer to their emotional regulation challenges. Their ability to see and experience a problem, notice how big it is for them in particular, decide to make it smaller because they want to go do XYZ, because they know that reality is they have to do XYZ either way, right? This could be playing out in the sense that your kid doesn't want to go play at the pool because, it's overwhelming. There's a lot of noise and there's splashing going on. Your kid's freaking out in the pool because their siblings are splashing them. And it's a pool, so of course the siblings should be allowed to splash, right? So you're even walking on eggshells when you can't even walk. You're swimming in eggshells. So this is relevant in the pool. Same thing in the shower, right? It's not about the water, because the water is just a common thread. It's not the cause. So you can't be reactive to changing the water experience. You need to be preventative and focusing on how you help your child break out of this pattern, because this pattern shows up in many areas of their life. And so, it's really important that you're not just chasing your kid with Febreze, right? Or, having them choose a certain shower day and that's the day they have to shower. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. We shower on Sundays. That just happens. That just has to happen. Or, all right, dude, showers are tough. So the only day I'm going to make you shower is the days after soccer practice, because that's when you're really rank. Right? There's a big difference between that being part of a plan that helps your child stay consistent, and that being part of a plan because you don't think your kid can handle anything different or more. And depending on your kid's age, showering or bathing twice a week is probably not enough for a lot of kids, right? So, especially in the summertime, but even in the winter with, the fact that the skin can dry out if you're not lotioning up and there's a lot of factors related to that as well. So paying attention to cleanliness and how this plays out regardless of season for your sensitive child is important, and the only way you can focus on changing this dynamic is by noticing the common thread that is internal. We just spoke about the common thread of water or hygiene or things your kid has to do but doesn't want to, right? That might also be a common thread in their meltdown triggers, but it's not the meltdown cause. There's a big difference between that. What causes the meltdown is not the same as the straw that breaks the camel's back, which might be the same straw every day, right? Might be the bath. So it's really important that we're noticing that we're paying attention to that, and telling your child over and over again that they're supposed to clean themselves a certain way, a certain number of times, and because of all these reasons, is not effective at solving the problem. So what is, right? What is? Changing the way that you see how your child solves problems, changing the way that you think about your child when they are having problems, right? Are you seeing your child as being a pain in the neck, right? Are you seeing your child as making a willful decision because they just don't care about themselves? Are you taking it personally and thinking that your child doesn't care that you care about them and doesn't want to listen to you and therefore is a disrespectful kid, right? If those are your reactions to this level of challenge that your kid is having, then that's going to get in the way of your ability to lead them out of it. Because when you're focused on being your child's leader in the household rather than your child's rule implementer, then you raise a child who sees possibility rather than sees limitations. You have to change the way that you limit your child based on how you see them before you expect them not to limit themselves, right? Your child is telling you consistently, I can't, I won't, no way, right? Then you need to notice why that is. Not just, oh, yes, you will. Or, let me tell you why you should, right? Because that doesn't solve the problem. That just moves them into doubling down. It fuels the fire. It either fuels the fire by your child exploding more, bigger, longer, or it fuels the fire because they don't think that they can tell you what they're worried about, so they shut up and take it. And then, as a result, they end up demonstrating the same problem, the same behavior in a different scenario, which has you back in the whack-a-mole problem, right? The whack-a-mole experience where, they might have, quote unquote, grown out of or followed suit or, realized who's boss, right? And moved into stopping the meltdowns around washing their bodies. But what happens next is that the meltdowns show up in a different way. And so as that happens, you start to continue to see your kid as a child who will always melt down. And so the meltdown behavior starts to be contributed to your child's personality. And because if you see meltdowns in all different areas of your kid's life, not necessarily all at once. I mean, some parents, some of you are dealing with that, which is extra hard and super frustrating and extra draining, definitely. So that's relevant too, because obviously if you're dealing with daily meltdowns multiple times a day, then you as a parent are seeing that behavior, or outright refusals, same thing, just constant, oil and water arguments, then you're going to see your child as somebody who always refutes what you ask of them, or who always refutes what they need to be doing. And when you do that, then you can get really stuck in tying your child's behavior to who they are. And those are two different things, right? Because if you believe your child is going to melt down, and those meltdowns continue to happen, right? Self-fulfilling prophecy in psychology, that's what we call it. But you can see this in all sorts of different fields in different ways. But in psychology, that's what we call it. And if you see your child who's going to melt, as somebody who's going to melt down, you expect the meltdown, and then they melt down. You're not surprised. You're used to it, right? You might even be numb to it. But then after, you're tired, you're drained, you're fried. That's when the resentment sets in. That's when the frustration sets in, and continues. And that's where you end up yelling, right? And there's no judgment here. We're explaining and understanding how your relationship impacts, and your viewpoints of your child's capacity and who they are impacts how you show up as a parent. And when that happens, it impacts how your child shows up, because when your child is supported in a relationship where you don't think that they're capable, they're feeding off of that energy that they take on as negative. They take that on as a sense of feeling incapable, right? Which we know is a negative emotion. And it doesn't give them the freedom to see beyond that. That can be a pretty suffocating experience as a sensitive child. And it's suffocating for both of you, right? Because you're stuck in the meltdown cycle with them. So how do we break out of this, right? You need to be able to change the way that you see your child. You need to be able to change the way that you are impacted by your child's behavior. And that requires not just a different strategy, a different way to talk to them, a different way to, quote unquote, put your foot down, a different way to, to tell them why they should shower, right? It requires you to be able to manage your own emotions, to change how you think about things related to your relationship with your child, and then to keep it going. Because you can't be playful and teach playfully if you don't think your kid's going to do it. You won't bring the energy of possibility to that event. And that relationship is what creates the result for sensitive kids who eliminate the meltdown cycle. It has to come from you as a parent, because, well, you've heard me say this in terms of the research, but I want to speak about this. Your child is much more susceptible to a change in their environment, and their biggest environment is home. Now, I'm going to speak to this, right? Because if your child's going to school, you might say, well, they spend more hours at school. So maybe a talk with their school counselor is going to actually be more impactful. But it's really, really important to understand what I mean by the biggest environment. The environment where your child feels the most safe, where they can feel vulnerable enough to sleep, is the environment they spend the most time in. Even if a majority of their waking hours during the school day, during the school week, is outside of the home. That's a big difference, right? The biggest relationship that they have is with you. And sensitive kids are more impacted and at a higher rate in changes in that environment. So great news, that means that you can change your relationship. You can change how you interact with your child. You can change how you set limits for your child. You can change how you help them change their behavior by doing that playfully without shame. And that allows your child to change way faster, much faster than non-highly sensitive kids. And we say this from experience, but also from all of the research it speaks to, right? Because when you think about, let's take, for example, Boyce's analogy. He uses the concept of some children are dandelions, right? Some children are tulips, and some children are orchids. When you learn how to care for an orchid, which is sensitive children, that's how the metaphor fits, then the orchid blooms and flourishes, right? It's beautiful. And I'm going to show a little bias here, but and I might be considered a dandelion in terms of the fact that I'm not highly sensitive. But dandelions aren't as pretty as orchids. They're not going to get prettier if you water them more. They just are. They're just like spiky, fluffy petals with spiky leaves, and that's it. They're going to just be that, right? They might multiply. There might be more of them. But orchids, when you know how to give them enough water, when you know how to regulate their sunlight, when you know how to care for their soil, when you know how to feed them well, they have brighter colors than if you were feeding them in a mediocre way. They have more blooms, and they last longer. And that's true for sensitive children, right? So we see this in flowers. And we also see this in sensitive children. And that is due to changing how you teach your child to change their behavior. What did I just name? I named watering the plant. I named tilling the soil. I named feeding the plant. And I named, feeding in terms of the orchid food. I'm not a green thumb. And sunlight, right? So there's 4 or 5 components there that are critical in helping the orchid bloom well. And the same thing is true for sensitive kids. This is not just about helping your kid remember the rules about why you should be clean. That's just a couple of ice cubes a week. That's just one part of the puzzle. So it's still, even just following that, if we want to go back to our orchid metaphor. Last time I had an orchid, I read somewhere that you needed to give it a couple of ice cubes a week, right? Just focusing on that and only focusing on that can still kill the orchid. The orchid can still perish, right? So when we think about ending the meltdown cycle, and if you're only focusing on teaching your child to remember the rules, that's only one part of raising a child who's sensitive to their big emotions, to small details, and who gets easily overwhelmed. And that can actually, when you hyper-focus on that, and that's your highest priority, that can actually keep you stuck and kill your relationship with them. I'm going to use that word because when your child doesn't feel heard, understood, and like you're there to collaborate with them, which is how people feel when they're just being told the rules over and over and over again, then they stop building a relationship with you. And that creates an even bigger problem because then they close down to the possibility of that relationship. And because they're sensitive, because they're highly sensitive, your child closes down to the possibility of what's possible for them. Because the opposite is also true, right? when you have an ineffective relationship and you're invalidating your child consistently, then they fare worse than the average child. And that's why we see you're comparing your child, who's 20% of the population, to 80% of the population. It's developmentally appropriate for all children, highly sensitive or not, to not have meltdowns on a daily basis, ages 3 and up. It's really pretty rough stuff to be parenting a sensitive kid who's 3 and under with daily meltdowns. So still pay attention to that, right? And with that being said, 3 and up, it's not developmentally appropriate for a 4-year-old, beyond the age of 4, to have meltdowns at all. So 5 and up, meltdowns at all. But daily meltdowns, not developmentally appropriate for 3 and up. So when you look at the window of tolerance that you're dealing with as a parent who's dealing with daily meltdowns, of course, when you compare your kid to a non-highly sensitive child and you see your kids having daily meltdowns, you're going to feel like something's not working, and it'll be really hard to break out of that pattern if you're not recognizing that your child's behavior isn't developmentally appropriate, but their needs are still appropriate, and their means of communication is where they need to change, and their means of emotional regulation is where they need to change. So it's okay and important to hold your kid to the same developmental standards. We expect sensitive kids to have big emotions and to notice small details and to be easily overstimulated. But that doesn't mean that you need to expect them to have meltdowns. That is not part of the personality trait. Even if you're a sensitive parent who loses their mind on a regular basis because you're overwhelmed. The families that we work with, I always tell my coaches, our team, we work with awesome parents, with awesome kids who just need awesome skills. So if you're stuck in this meltdown cycle yourself, of losing it on your kid, yelling, crying, etc., on a weekly basis or even a daily basis, if you're dealing with multiple times meltdowns a day, you're probably yelling at your kid, and there's no judgment. We see that, right? Because it's a lot. There's a lot going on. And so if you're an awesome parent who's missing those awesome skills, and your kid's missing the awesome skills too, then it can feel like you're circling the drain. And we really want you to be able to notice that there's a way out, and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate from a sense of saying that you're a wrong person or that you're screwing it up because you're bad, right? You just don't have the system to turn it around, and that's okay. That's why we do these trainings here for you. That's why we help you see that it's possible, because there's so many people out there, so many coaches out there who will tell you that your kid's highly sensitive and so they're going to have meltdowns, and that's not true. Those two things are not inclusive of each other. They do not go hand in hand. So we focus on how to get out of that effectively. Okay, so we covered the fact that your child is struggling when they're trying to take a shower. We covered the fact that this is not a thinking problem or a knowing problem. This is a feeling problem. We covered the fact that your relationship is that solution. You need to be able to notice where your child is stuck. You need to be able to notice how you're keeping them stuck in your relationship. You need to be able to notice how to playfully change their behavior and set limits without laying the hammer down, because that doesn't work. Or taking privileges away, or telling them they can't go see with their friends because if they don't shower, their friends won't want to see them anyways. That's double jeopardy. Doesn't teach. And you know that, right? Because it feels crappy to do it. There's a big difference between knowing that it's the right thing that works for your kid and it's going to be effective, and your kid struggles to to start the plan and follow the plan. That's different than knowing in your heart of hearts that you're not being the parent you want to be, and you just don't know any other way and you're tired, right? So a lecture's not going to get there. Removing privileges and making threats is not going to get there. And dealing with the anxiety that is the underlying issue is not going to get there through another adult. It has to be through you. And that is proven time and time again for sensitive kids, because we see over and over and over again, and you might even see this in our Facebook group or in other Facebook groups for sensitive kids, that parents of sensitive kids who are dealing with the meltdown cycle can take their kid to therapy, and their kid can have some change in their behavior, but not all change in their behavior. And that's because they're working on these whack-a-mole pockets of problems rather than looking at the whole issue, especially if that therapist is not trained in highly understanding the highly sensitive personality trait. But the system is also what's relevant there. So we talk about that. What does that take, right? We just went through the 4 components. And that's simply not included in individual therapy model. And it's also not systematic. It's just focused on what your problem is of the week, which is exactly what we talked about you need to avoid focusing on. Not from a sense of you ignore the problem, but in terms of what you focus on in order to solve the problem. That's different, right? Okay, so how to get out of it, right? You need a proven plan. You need a system. We've helped hundreds of families break out of this pattern. And if you're the one that your family is one that we can help, then we'll tell you how that will help your family, and how we're certain that that will help your family. And we need to do that by having a conversation with you. Because, a quick message, email, text, whatever, with just a swift, a brief observation of the problem is not going to give us enough information to understand whether or not we can help. And prescription without proper diagnosis is malpractice. And that's true if you're working with us in our private practice, and it's also true if you're working with us in this line of work, which is through the coaching company. We're not diagnosing your child with a mental health disorder, but we're certainly identifying the problem and clearly determining what your plan of action needs to be. And that is a prescribed solution, and that is relevant to whether we work with you, like I said, if you work locally to us, or because you found us here, it's likely we would be talking about working together through the coaching company. And so we have to know whether or not we're a fit. It's a mutual decision, and we need to be sure that we can help you. And we can't do that through a brief message. So how do you get there? How do you talk to us? You got to get to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk. If you're a parent of a sensitive child, which is what we highlighted today, and the challenges that parents of sensitive kids have. If you resonated with this message and your teen is challenged, and you're dealing with their challenging behavior and taking care of their bodies, then I encourage you to go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk. And we will talk to you and your teen about whether or not we're a good fit. But that's for high schoolers and up. And young children need to make all of their changes through the relationship with you as a parent. And so that's why we would talk to you about whether or not we're a fit. All right. Have a wonderful day. I'll speak to you later, and make it a great one.